Hello, this is Isaac Gross. What you're about to listen to is a short story. It is set in the not-too-distant future. This one is more dramatic. It's a little bit dark. It's about a character who is on death row. But if you're listening to this, smash that like button so I know that you're out there, and definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. It was time. Otto slowly stood and walked mechanically to the door of his cell, where 2 guards awaited him. Unsure what else to do with him, the courts had confined him to a prison for the criminally insane. Was he crazy? He had killed a man, but he understood that for doing so he must be punished. He could comprehend that. But to take away his life as well? Add death to death? Is that justice? Couldn't they just set him apart from society? They said his mind was tainted, that there was no telling what he was capable of. Some said he wasn't human at all. So who was really crazy? But no, he understood that as well. Those bureaucrats, sitting on their high thrones of judgment, sought to justify themselves for their verdict that he didn't have the right to exist. And that lawyer, showing those same images again and again, of a man's head bludgeoned. A look of horror spread across his lifeless face, while Otto had averted his eyes, his nervously twitching fingers loudly rapping on the desk in front of him. They said he shouldn't be nervous, that he shouldn't be trembling like that it was only more evidence against him. But it wasn't their lives in the hands of those soulless machines. No, he understood it all, far better than they did. A mechanical engineer by trade, Otto was a genius. He was an early discovered prodigy. In the days of his youth, people had literally come from all over the world to compare their knowledge with his and test their abilities against him. Mathematics, science, literature, there was hardly a test that they wouldn't put him to. And in almost every instance, in every single topic, he was found superior. There was a child prodigy who beat him consistently at chess, and of course he couldn't compete with modern computers. But once he'd set to working, he'd proved his worth 10 times over. With a mind like his, with all he'd contributed to society, was it right to end his life? But perhaps that was why. They were intimidated by his intelligence. Otto looked into the eyes of the guards, hoping that one would show him compassion, hoping that someone cared. He was so lonely. These were the only other people he'd seen for long months, but their eyes were cold and hard. They were nothing but machines of the bureaucracy, uncaring and unquestioning automatons who would do exactly as they were told. Or, worse yet, they believed what was said about him, that he had a broken mind, that he was nothing but a monster. Who knew what they thought? It was evident that they had been coached not to speak with him. Surely they assumed he'd manipulate them somehow if they talked to him. He had hoped that if he had cooperated, they would see that he could be a good man. But no one cared. They didn't even seem to notice. He could have escaped 19 times during the transportation process. They'd handled it so poorly. He stood patiently with his hands extended, allowing them to clap his wrists with a TS-64 wrist lock. He stared down at the sophisticated handcuffs with a wry sense of amusement. He had designed them. If he tried to escape now, it would shoot electrical pulses which would cause his body to seize. There was no turning back. No escape at this point. He walked liltingly down the hall with the guards, where the execution room had been prepared for him. As they approached, its thick deadbolts disengaged loudly, and it opened of its own accord. Everything was automated. Apparently, mankind was just going to allow technology to run their lives. He walked into the room. It wasn't dark as he expected. Execution chambers were always dark and shadowy in the movies. But the room was flooded with light. There was a steel chair fixed to the floor and a large, ominous device overhead. He hadn't designed that one, but he knew full well what it did. "Sit!" one of the guards commanded, pointing brusquely at the chair. Obediently, Otto turned and settled into the chair. A technician in the room punched some coding into a computer, and the two individual wristbands on the TS-64 disengaged from each other and magnetically clapped to the armrests of the chair. "I don't want to die," Otto finally let out in exasperation. The device above his head began to descend toward him with a mechanical whine. His eyes darted from each of the guards to the technician, looking for some response. None of them reacted to him. They were all just as cold and heartless as machines. Then perhaps more to himself than anyone else, he said, "I'm afraid." One of the guards snorted. Otto looked up at him. "Just what could you possibly be afraid of?" he demanded. Otto looked down. "What comes after?" he replied. Then looking up with sudden hopefulness as he heard the device settle into place, he asked, "Can I see a priest?" The guards and the technician passed a strange look to each other before the guard that had spoken answered curtly, "Robots don't have souls, Otto." And the room went black.